2004's Van Helsing was one of Universal Studios' many attempts at launching a film franchise based on their classic movie monsters. It was given a huge budget, contained huge spectacle, and was meant to lead into all kinds of spin-offs. However, after a disappointing box office and poor reviews, all these sequel and spin-off plans were quietly abandoned. So today, I want to re-examine this movie. We'll explore the history, the franchise that never was, and I'll offer up some of my personal thoughts on the project. The idea for 2004's Van Helsing arose after the financial success of the 1999 film The Mummy and its 2001 sequel, The Mummy Returns. Universal Studios got big cartoon dollar signs in their eyes, and their mouths began salivating at the thought of replicating the same formula with all their other classic monster properties. Universal, of course, enlisted the writer and director behind those films, Stephen Sommers, to take on a new project based on Abraham Van Helsing, a character who has been adapted many times but is most often known as a monster hunter and the arch nemesis of Count Dracula. In addition to Van Helsing and Count Dracula, this project would also include iconic monsters such as Frankenstein, Frankenstein's creature, werewolves, and many others. Similar to how the Mummy films were inspired by the Indiana Jones franchise, this Van Helsing movie would be inspired by the James Bond franchise. A release date of May 7th of 2004 was set, which was likely taking advantage of a break between James Bond films, as Die Another Day was released 2 years prior and Casino Royale was still in development. For the title character of Van Helsing, Hugh Jackman was attached, who was hot off the success of his role as Wolverine in the X-Men franchise. The decision was also made to change Van Helsing's first name from Abraham to Gabriel, as Sommers did not think that he could have a lead character named Abraham for some reason. However, this name change also ties into Van Helsing's backstory about maybe being an angel in this movie. For the role of Anna, Sommers always had Kate Beckinsale in mind, but initially hesitated offering her the role, as he thought it was too similar to another film she was shooting around the same time, that being 2003's Underworld. Eventually, her agent got Sommers to send the script, and Beckinsale signed on immediately. To fill out the rest of the cast, we got Richard Roxburgh as Count Dracula, David Wenham as the Friar Carl, and Schuler Hensley as Frankenstein's monster. Principal photography kicked off in January of 2003, shooting in Prague, Rome, and of course, Universal Studios. And it seems like the studio was sparing no expense when it came to launching this potential franchise, as the final budget figure is estimated to be a monstrous $170 million. So the pressure was on for this film to perform well as it made its way to the big screen. Van Helsing had an opening weekend of $51 million, debuting at number 1 in the box office. Domestically, it would make $120 million, and overseas it would rake in $179 million for a total worldwide gross of just over $300 million. This means it wasn't a total box office bomb, but with such a large budget not even factoring in marketing or distribution, it also wasn't really a smash success. The reviews weren't great either. The film currently holds a 24% critic and a 57% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, in addition to a 6.1 out of 10 on IMDb and a 2.8 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Again, just like the box office, it wasn't a total failure, but it wasn't a certified success. So now that we know the history behind the film, let's explore some of the failed sequels and spin-offs that it was meant to launch, as well as to what happened to the property after the dust settled. Leading up to this film's release, Universal brought out all the stops when it came to marketing and other media tie-ins. We of course got the Van Helsing video game for Xbox, PlayStation 2, and Game Boy Advance, which followed a similar plot to the film and had many of the same voice actors, such as Hugh Jackman. There was also an animated prequel titled Van Helsing: The London Assignment, which featured the same cast and was released on DVD 1 week after the film. We also got a one-shot comic published by Dark Horse Comics titled Van Helsing from Beneath the Rue Morgue, which takes place during the events of the movie between the opening with Mr. Hyde and when he gets back to Rome. But these were all projects that actually came out. What about the ones that didn't? The biggest one is the TV show titled Transylvania. This was announced in April, 1 month before the film hit theaters, and would have been written and executive produced by Stephen Sommers. According to the Futon critic, this series would have been, quote, a character-driven soap opera, and the central figure will be a young cowboy from Texas who's pressed into duty and becomes the sheriff in a town where oddities abound. Universal were so excited about this project that they made sure the production team for Van Helsing left the Transylvania setup from the movie, so they could utilize it in the TV show. However, after the box office of the film failed to hit the studio's hopes, the series was cancelled. Reportedly, this was also due to the fact that the pilot would have been too expensive to shoot. Not only was the Transylvania set originally left up for the TV series, but also for a direct sequel. Universal began developing a second film before the first even hit theaters, and just like the TV show, it too was cancelled due to the underwhelming box office. So the property just sat for several years as the studio thought about what they wanted to do with it. In May of 2012, a reboot was announced with Robert Orci and Alex Kurtzman producing, with Tom Cruise slated in the lead role. By November of 2015, John Spates and Eric Heiserer were hired to write the film, but Tom Cruise stepped down from starring in it. He would star in another infamous failed franchise starter, 2017's The Mummy.
What the hell?
This new Mummy film was meant to kickstart the Dark Universe, which would have been an MCU-like interconnected film franchise that would have included all the classic Universal movie monsters. A whole slate of films were announced ahead of The Mummy hitting theaters, with a new Van Helsing being among the lineup, with Channing Tatum in talks for the lead role. But once The Mummy failed and the Dark Universe was abandoned, this new Van Helsing movie fell apart. News of yet another Van Helsing reboot came in December of 2020. A script was written by Eric Pearson, James Wan was going to produce, and Overlord director Julius Avery was set to direct. The project went silent for 3 years until we got an update in 2023 that it was still happening, but now Avery was both directing and writing it. And as of the time of this video, that is the last we've heard about the Van Helsing brand in regards to any big budget film adaptations. There was a TV show called Van Helsing that ran on the Sci-Fi Network from 2016 to 2021, but that was not connected to Universal at all. Because after all, the character of Abraham Van Helsing is in the public domain, so anyone can make a project with the name, which means he's also been in various other media as well. But for the time being, probably the most popular version is from the 2004 film, which I'd like to take some time to share some of my own thoughts about. But first, a very quick recap of the plot. This movie follows Gabriel Van Helsing after he is dispatched to Transylvania to assist Anna Valerius in order to defeat the sinister Count Dracula, who Anna's family has had ancient beef with. Count Dracula needs Frankenstein's monster in order to give life to thousands of his undead children. It's a pretty cut and dry good versus evil big budget blockbuster story that I'm sure you've seen many times before. This may or may not be a hot take, but I actually really enjoyed Van Helsing. I'm not even joking. In my I, Frankenstein video, I was talking about how there's two categories of bad movies that can actually be good. Ones that are so bad that they're good, and ones that you know are bad, but don't care about because they're so fun and entertaining. Van Helsing is the latter. The film has many flaws, but at the same time, I don't really care because I had a blast watching it. What I think made this movie work so well with me is that it shows a vibe and it stuck with it. That being a very over-the-top, goofy vibe. It really managed to capture that cheesy cartoon feeling that Stephen Sommers made work so well in the Mummy franchise. Everything in this movie is larger than life and dialed up to 11. The idea of realism is just thrown out the window, and we get machine gun crossbows and horse carriages jumping over ravines. And I love it. I mean, if you like movies where people crash through windows swinging from a rope, you'll love this movie. But one area where this film fails, where The Mummy succeeded, is the romance angle. Brendan Fraser is hot, Rachel Weisz is hot, and they are hot together. Van Helsing manages to get two attractive lead actors, but they just don't work well together. They have very little romantic chemistry, and their forced relationship doesn't land. Another flaw I found with the film is that it's just overstuffed. There's too much stuff going on, and too many different characters were crammed into this thing. I mean, we have Dracula, Dracula's brides, Frankenstein, Frankenstein's monster, Igor, werewolves, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I'm surprised we didn't see the Invisible Man and the Creature from the Black Lagoon while we were at it. In fact, Sommers originally planned an appearance by the Creature from the Black Lagoon in one scene, but Universal told him to take it out as they had potential plans for a standalone project. I think they should have cut out a few of these different monsters and focused on the ones that were integral to the plot to make the movie more streamlined. Listen, there's no denying that the visual effects in this film can be extremely bad at some parts, and there's certainly too much over-reliance on CGI as well. The big punch-up fight at the very end with the werewolf Hugh Jackman and the giant man-bat didn't carry enough weight for it to be an effective climax since it just doesn't feel real. But if we're gonna point out the bad visual effects, we also need to pay respect to some of the awesome practical effects. I love Frankenstein's monster's design in this movie, since it does something new without deviating too far from what we've come to expect. The steampunk angle that they took worked really well into this world they crafted. The sets are huge and are filled with personality. This movie cost $170 million, and you can totally tell. It just looks expensive. The writing in this film also just isn't the strongest. The plot is just non-stop and doesn't give you a chance to breathe. You also have to accept the fact that some things will not be fully explained and other things just won't make sense. There's also a fair amount of comedic beats that didn't totally land with me, such as the stuff with David Wenham's Friar Carl. But that's just my opinion. I'm sure other people found him funny. It's honestly a shame this franchise didn't take off. I think a lot of the mistakes they made in this film could have been course corrected in a second installment. But that's just one nerd's opinion on the internet. Let's wrap it up. In an effort to recapture the success of the Mummy franchise, Universal attempted to recreate the same formula with another classic character. But this movie just didn't resonate with audiences the same way and had way too big of a budget. As a result, the planned TV spin-off and sequel were cancelled, and a movie based on the character has struggled to get off the ground ever since. So that's the story of 2004's Van Helsing. Yet another franchise that never was. But what are your thoughts on Van Helsing? Did you enjoy the movie like I did, or do you hate it? Let me know down in the comments. This has been Tom from Isenhart Productions, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week. And here's a little clue for next week's video.
Let the games begin.